How are we doing this morning? Good. It is so good to be at a conference, face to face, in a room with other enablement people. Like we just pause and say, wow. Like that is such a cool thing that's happening. I don't know if any of you, I know some of you, it's like this is the first conference that you're coming back to. And that is exciting. And I'm excited to be here with you all this morning. We'll go ahead and get the slide up here. You got it? Okay. While they're working on that, the next 30 minutes, I'm going to be talking about the future of sales enablement. We know that the future of sales is already here. We know that the pandemic has accelerated digital buying. We know that face-to-face doesn't maybe happen as much as it used to. And so what are we going to do about it as the enablement practitioner at your organization, as the enablement function? And what do we need to do to catch up to sales? Now, I'll start out by saying this. I don't have a crystal ball, right? Next 5 years of enablement, I can't tell you exactly what it's going to look like. But here's the exciting part. Everybody in this room has the opportunity to shape that, to shape what does the future of sales enablement actually look like. And so for the next 20 or so minutes, I want us to just start thinking creatively, newly ideas about how enablement could look like over the next couple of years. And how could we participate in that? So will I give you some thoughts and ideas? Absolutely. But everybody in this room, we have an opportunity to learn from each other. And that will be my challenge to you over the next 2 days. What can we take back to our organizations? How can we shape the future of sales enablement? Like I was introduced, my name is John McClellan. I'm a senior manager of revenue enablement at Showpad. Showpad is an enablement platform. We've got a booth out there. I'd be happy to chat with you all. I don't know if you saw on the agenda previously, but originally my boss, the VP of enablement at Showpad, was going to be speaking. Andrea, she's an incredible speaker, so hopefully you get to hear her sometime. But because of some travel issues, she was unable to be here. And like any good enabler, we adapt, right? We adapt. So I am so excited to be here with you all and share some thoughts. So the future of sales enablement. What am I going to cover here this morning? I'm going to walk through first a little bit of a state of the union, a little bit of holding up the mirror to ourselves and asking the hard questions. All right, what are those challenges that we are facing today as an enablement profession? And then from there, I'm going to jump into some emerging trends, things that I'm seeing, that we're all seeing, that some of these will probably be no surprise to you. But the idea here is that we start to think about, okay, with these new trends, how do we adapt? And what are some things that we can do? So I will, at the end, leave us with hopefully just a couple of practical takeaways. But again, my main goal for this session is to just getting us thinking a little bit differently about enablement. I'll also say this, you come to a conference and you expect to hear from subject matter experts, right? Experts. And sure, I've got some experience in enablement. I've been in enablement now in a formal enablement role for about 5 years. Prior to that, my background is actually in product marketing. And so from product marketing, as I was working at a SaaS organization, I started to think about how much information we throw at sales. I was fighting for time with the sales organization, fighting. And then I started to think about, what does it mean to be a seller at this organization? How much information are they actually receiving? And from there, I started to think about, how could we simplify it? And that's how I got into enablement, with a passion to simplify the messages that we send to our sales organization to make it hyper clear about why them, and why now. But like I said, I'm still learning. And that's why I'm excited to be with you all, to be learning here at this conference over the next 2 days. So let's start with taking an honest look at the current state of the enablement function, of the enablement industry. Where are we now? We know that enablement, we hear this all the time. It's growing, it's exploding, it's changing. Might still be a little bit abstract. I loved how we started out this morning by trying to explain what we do. Have any of you ever been to a cocktail party and they're like, oh, so what's your job? What do you do? And you're like, I work in sales enablement. And they're like, sales enablement. So like, are you a seller? You're like, no, but I sell internally to my stakeholders. And like, oh, so you're marketing. And you're like, no, but I also kind of market internally the programs that I'm working on. And they're like, oh, you're L&D, HR. And you're like, not really, but I think about those things as well. I think about the people, right? And it ends up being a 45-minute long conversation about what it is we do. And that's because 10 years ago, we didn't even have this title, right? Some of us, like a conversation I had at the table, we were maybe strategic marketing, or we had other titles, but we were kind of doing enablement. But now that enablement is more of that established function, there's still so many ideas about what it looks like at our organizations, right? If you look to the person next to you, the person behind you, their world of enablement and how they define enablement at their organization might look vastly different than yours. And that leads us to essentially no universal standards or industry conventions on a few things. Scope. Are we just content? Are we training? Do we focus on process? How much of there is a crossover with L&D? Or how do we work with marketing? What's marketing's role? What's our role? What's the actual scope? In addition to that, who do we actually support? How many in this room, show of hands, support sales reps, account executives? Most of us here. How about customer success? Excellent. What about more technical services, pre-sales roles? Okay. Right, so even that scope, most of us supporting sales, but there's other roles in the organization. So your organization, what is that scope? Who are we supporting? Naming. This one is an interesting one. How many of you would say your team or your role is enablement? Like, do you call yourself enablement? I am an enablement XYZ. What about effectiveness? Show of hands. Effectiveness? No. Readiness? Field readiness? Okay. Right, even that, or I hear productivity, other roles like that. The naming of enablement can look differently at an organization. ROI, right? We were just getting questions at the end of that last session. How do we prove, how do we demonstrate the value of enablement at our organizations? Sure, we have different metrics about our enablement programs, and we try to attribute those to sales performance, but even that, and the frameworks, and the different tools that we use to measure and the dashboards, frankly, we're still kind of figuring it out a little bit, right? And then finally, structure. Stephanie said she felt at home when she was able to be back with the Office of Sales, right? But some of us maybe report into RevOps or an operations type role. So even where enablement lives within an organization can look differently. And the struggle is real. The pressures that we face in enablement, a growing function, something that's rapidly changing, prompt, really why I'm even here talking to you today, is the need for us to actually evolve the category. So I'm going to list off just a couple of challenges, of pressures that I hear while talking to enablement practitioners, and a few of these might sound familiar to you. The first is the sales paradox. Oh, the sales paradox. Reps and managers, right? They want to be at their best. And so what do? They come to the enablement team and they're like, oh my gosh, my reps don't know how to handle any objections. We need objection handling 101. Let's create a course. Let's create a live training. Let's create all this stuff. And so you, as the enablement practitioner, you're taking in that project, that priority. You're asking all the right questions. You're getting the why. You're getting success metrics. And you go back into your own little enablement world and you put together the most amazing training. And you go back to sales and you're like, all right, here's the training. And they're like, oh, more training? No, right? That is the sales paradox, right? Where sales comes to us, or whoever it is you're supporting comes to you and asks for something, and you come back and they don't want to dedicate time to it, right? That's the sales paradox. The next challenge or pressure that I see is this whole idea of this could have been an email. How many of you feel like enablement sometimes gets delegated to being like a chief of staff or like communication or air traffic control at your organization, right? All the time. And sometimes we kind of over-index a little bit on the lift for everything, right? Where something could have just been an email, it ends up becoming a live 30-minute training. So that is probably a constant battle for us to think about, how do I communicate this? What does the field actually need to know? What can I leave out? Do I need to do a live training? That's a big pressure that I see today. And that leads us to this idea of digital fatigue, right? 5 years ago, I remember when the pandemic started, I remember sitting in a conference room thinking, how are we going to take our in-person week-long onboarding program for our new hires and convert that into something that's virtual, that can still be engaging? And so we went and we created all of these amazing programs and e-learning and using our tools to do it, and we loved it. But it turns out sellers don't engage with corporate e-learning like they do with YouTube or Instagram, right? And we're finding more and more that reps might be watching something at like 2x speed and maybe guessing the end of your quiz, right, to see if they actually get the correct answer. We're getting a little bit of digital fatigue. So the question that I ask here is, have we maybe swung the pendulum a little bit too far? And that leads to system gaming, right? Like, how quickly can I get through this e-learning that our enablement team put together? Guessing that result, right? Multitasking. And finally, the priority swirl. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more in a workshop we're doing at noon, but as an enablement practitioner, we are getting requests all the time for training, for skill, competency development, and you're often hearing them from many different groups, right? Marketing has some priorities. RevOps needs to get your reps doing X, Y, Z. Everything is a priority, therefore nothing is a priority, right? If you ask different people, you get a different priority. So how do we handle that? And I put this quote up here, the definition of insanity, of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, to say this, to challenge us that we might not be able to change what's on this screen here. We might not be able to change the pressures that are facing us as an enablement function. But what can we do, and what can we take from even the next 2 days to help us think differently about how to solve some of these challenges or how to do things differently as we go into the next wave of enablement? And so what I want to present now is really just 4 emerging trends that I'm seeing in enablement, things, ways of thinking that we could take hold of, that we could participate, that I hope that we start thinking about as an enablement function that could propel us forward. Each of these probably could be its own like session itself with different experts sharing ideas. So we're just going to scratch the surface a little bit. But my question to you for these 4 trends is, how are you thinking about these different areas, and what does it look like at your organization? So the first is moving up the value chain, moving from sales enablement to revenue enablement. Gartner predicts that by 2025, 75% of highest growth companies are going to deploy a RevOps model focused on the buyer journey. What does that mean? At every single touch point with a buyer, from the time that they look up the website to the time that they're up for renewal, companies are going to be thinking about that entire buyer and customer journey. And so enablement teams should be thinking about the same. Enablement should mirror or support that end-to-end journey, not just the moment of truth, like the moment of sale. Think about that onboarding manager for your new customer. That experience could dictate what renewal looks like. Sales enablement, and this is not to say anything poorly about, I've worked in sales enablement that was just focused on sellers, right? Maybe that's the scope for right now, and that is fine. But if we know that we need to start thinking about the rest of the organization and actually recognizing other go-to-market teams or individuals as sellers, how does that change our scope and the value that we can provide the organization? We just launched new messaging at Showpad to our teams internally. And if you stop by our booth, you'll probably hear some of that new messaging, hopefully. Now, we didn't just focus on the sellers, though. We had services, SEs, our customer success teams, everybody learning a new core narrative that typically I would think, oh, just sales needs to be able to present these 19 slides or whatever it is, right? But imagine the power of having our entire revenue team giving one consistent message about who we are as an organization, the value that we can provide, the challenges that we solve, the use cases our customers are experiencing or using in our platform today. It's not just about the consistency, though. It also embeds a culture of learning for any customer-facing role. Collaboration, empowerment, shared goals. Now, even the Sales Enablement Collective, I like this quote here, revenue enablement means any investment that helps the revenue team work together in concert to produce more revenue. I'm a music guy, playing a band, and I think about the different players in this band, right? We all want to be playing the same music, bar by bar, measure by measure, to make sure that it actually sounds good, right? Like it doesn't suck, right? That's the goal, right? What about our go-to-market teams? You as the enablement practitioner have the opportunity to help everybody be singing off the same sheet music. So, some of us in this room already think of ourselves as revenue enablement. Maybe some of us are starting to think about that. And maybe there are other roles within the organization that we can support over time. The next trend that we're seeing here is hybrid selling, and therefore hybrid enablement is here to stay. Now, I'll caveat by saying we're not reinventing the wheel here. We've always done some sort of virtual selling, right? Whether that was like phone calls or webinars for years, right? SDRs have done it basically since day one, right? Most sales reps, CSMs, pre-sales consultants, they don't always see the customer face-to-face, but we know that the pandemic, and since the pandemic, digital-enabled sales interactions are 2 times more important. The B2B selling landscape has completely changed. So sellers are coming to us and saying, hey, we need the right tools to actually sell in this new kind of digital remote selling environment. However, we don't want to just sweep into everything being digital. Why? There's a few challenges. We know that attention span for our buyers starts to wane about 30 to 40 minutes into an interaction, right? So maybe that hour-long demo that we used to deliver, maybe that's not going to cut it anymore. And our job as an enablement practitioner is to then understand for your organization, what does hybrid enablement look like? How much of an appetite is there for face-to-face? And I'm not talking just live training here, but think about the sales process. Think about your sellers. Where do they meet the buyer? Things like discovery, could that happen in a virtual environment? Absolutely. What about building rapport? How about building relationships? What does that look like? So we can't index too much in one direction or the other, and therefore there's this idea of hybrid. And it might feel uncomfortable for us, right? To determine, should this be a live training? Should this be an in-person? Should this be a virtual thing? Like, that is going to be a trend that we're going to continue to see over time of how do we establish ourselves as a hybrid enablement function. The third trend that we're seeing is a focus on broader talent trends. When we think about professionals who are looking for a new job, kind of 3 things continue to pop up as a priority. They all kind of center around culture, work-life balance, compensation and benefits, colleagues and culture. We know that things like the Great Resignation or quiet quitting, like all these different buzzwords about why people leave their jobs. That is definitely, for an enablement team, I'm trying to view that as actually an opportunity for us. And I think we heard it a little bit from the panel up front here just a minute ago. What if enablement was regarded as an employee benefit for your organization. This is actually something, so we have a charter at Showpad. We have our own enablement charter that talks about who we are, what we do, what's our scope, what we don't do, like all that stuff, right? We have enablement as an employee benefit in our charter because I believe, that enablement has the power to transform individual performance and therefore company performance. I want our sellers to not only see our, we have got a competency framework that we're working on and skill development. I want them to know about that, but I want them to actually experience a level of growth, progression in their role. Your sales rep, your revenue teams, will they leave your organization? Eventually, yes. Will they leave my organization? Yes. I want them to leave better than when they got there. And as an enablement team, we have the opportunity to create and work actually as a closer partnership with HR, enablement that can lead to more engagement as an employee benefit. So think about this, just a couple of different ideas here. I mentioned sales competencies, right? What if those were embedded into our job descriptions, into the interview process, right? So that from day one, before a sales rep even walks through the door at your organization, they know that this sales program at this company, this is awesome. I'm actually gonna learn, I'm gonna grow here. How do we recognize and reward people who invest in learning, right? We talked about that a little bit. How is enablement promoted as a part of maybe your corporate EVP or employer brand even? How are you working with HR? For some of us in the room, maybe we don't really talk to HR that much, right? How are we working with them to ensure that enablement is viewed as an employee benefit? And finally, and I think Dina said this, think like a CMO. I love that. Let's do what the best marketing teams do and focus on the customer, which is who? Our learners. Our learners. Because after all, isn't this supposed to be fun, right? This little enablement training that we put together for them? As we face kind of this new digital environment, the need for us to put on our creative hats is going to it's going to continue, right? We can't just keep doing the same thing. So hopefully over the next 2 days, we get some ideas as we think about, all right, I'm launching new messaging, or I need to certify my reps on the new product demo that we need to make sure everybody is completely certified by the XY date, right? What are some things that we can be doing to be even more creative, to meet learners where they're at? Think about your learners today. Where are they at? What are they doing? What are they listening to? What are they watching, right? Great programs should be like universities. We've got core curriculum. We've got cool electives. Right? We want this to be aspirational. So what can we do to make our programs even more creative? That's a trend that I'm continuing to see. All right, so 4 trends, 4 kind of ways of thinking for enablement over the next couple of years. So to wrap, if what got us here won't get us there, what are we supposed to do as an enablement function? Hopefully, as I went through those 4 trends and those challenges, you thought of maybe a couple different ideas or things that even at your organization you could start doing. But I want to just give you 4 kind of more actionable, tangible things that maybe you could take back and start doing. Use that sales paradox as a negotiation lever. Right? So when your sales manager comes to you and says, all right, I need my sales reps ready to demo our product. Can you put together curriculum, training? And you say, absolutely. You go into the enablement world and you start putting together this incredible training program and you determine, all right, it's going to take about 8 hours of your seller's time. You take that back to the manager and they say, oh, could we do it in 4 hours? And you're like, okay, 4 hours. Well, tell me then, Mr. Sales Manager, what out of all this curriculum, what is the top 50% of a priority for you? All right, is it just getting them all up to speed in the demo? Is it product knowledge, right? There's components here to this product demonstration. And they do this all the time in sales with your prospects and customers, right? Where they say, all right, it's going to be 20K, and the customer comes back and says, oh, can we do it for 10K? And you're like, okay, so what do we need to take away then? Right, so use that sales paradox as a negotiation lever. Next, We talked about this with hybrid environment. Define what hybrid means for your organization. Sit down with your leadership and talk about what needs to be virtual versus what could actually be in person. And we're going to probably think about that a lot more with our onboarding programs over time, or even, sales kickoff, things like that. So sit down with leadership and identify what does it mean to be hybrid and hybrid enablement at your organization. This is kind of a funny one, right? Produce work that people actually want to do. And it's a very simple question, but ask yourself this. After you spend all this time putting together this program, just say, does this suck, right? Would I actually want to do this, right? Our RevOps team just released some new training that I went through. Our sales team went through it, and I thought to myself, oh my gosh, I don't know if I actually want to go through this. If I'm thinking that, our sales reps are thinking that. So let's actually produce work that people want to do. How can we be creative about this? And then finally, like Dina said, think like a CMO, market your programs internally. Who are those champions within your organization, your advocates, those who can help you take something to the next level? What are the communication channels at your organization that you're leveraging? Sure, you've aligned priorities with the CRO, and they're 100% into it, and you put together an enablement program, but do not forget about what happens after that. What happens after we actually deliver the enablement program? If we don't want it to be one and done, how do we continue to market that program beyond the actual training itself? So start thinking about, like a good marketer, how can we get people excited about this? How can I use my champions? How can I use the internal channels at your organization to get people excited about the enablement programs we're creating? So, to conclude, I don't know what the next couple of years look like for enablement. Don't have a crystal ball. But like I said, the people in this room together, we can shape what enablement looks like. And these challenges, these pressures, these emerging trends, that's what we can do, is share ideas around them and only develop, and from the maturity model that we saw earlier, right? We all can get to that next level. I have no doubt about that, but I'm excited to shape the future with you all. And speaking of the maturity model, Showpad actually did put out a enablement maturity calculator. We took it for our own enablement team. It was fascinating, gave us some good ideas about where to actually think and invest time in. So there's a QR code if you want to use that to take that enablement maturity calculator, on our website. I see a couple people taking pictures, so I'll give it 1 second. Okay. And now we'll open it up for questions.
Yes, so the first question that I have on here for you is, enablement is an organizational approach to tools and practices that exist with a desired output. How do you convince others this organizational approach is best?
Yeah, absolutely. So organizational approach to tools and practices that exist with a desired output. All right, so I'd have probably questions about that and what that approach looks like at the organization, but how do I convince others of like any enablement approach, right? I think a lot of it has to do with listening and sitting down with our stakeholders to understand what their priorities are and to create our own enablement charter, and then, like a good marketer, continue to get in front of those stakeholders and make sure that we have the same priorities and to convince them of the approach. Now, to convince them of something that's like, learning or tools and whatnot, right? We can come to them with data and other things to try to convince them of that. I would also try to actually leverage their own team members as well and bring them into the process of creating the enablement programs. So bring your sales rep in. If you're putting together a training, put them into that actual build and see what results we can get.
All right, second one is, with our society still progressing to life after COVID, how do you combat digital fatigue when it's become the norm the last 2 years?
Yeah, so this obviously depends on your organization, right? Depending on how much of an appetite there is for more face-to-face type of engagement. I will say this though, let's say you have to do some e-learning, you got to make it happen, and that's the only option. You got to do some virtual training on it or whatnot. I would look for opportunity to actually make something a little bit more fun, like the next question is saying. And so, for example, one thing that I did recently is we had some mandatory e-learning, right? Anytime we put the word mandatory, sales reps are like, oh no, here we go. Mandatory e-learning. And what we actually did is we scheduled from 4 to 5, a happy hour, virtual, and had people actually just sit down and complete that. Even though so we're all on Zoom, we're completing the e-learning, but we are all together, right? So think about ways that you can still bring togetherness, even if it is e-learning or training. That's something that's delivered in a virtual environment.